Meet Natalie. It's late in the evening, and her office light is still on. Next to her is a cold cup of coffee, and she's observing the emails that are piling up. Another meeting with defense sponsors looms tomorrow, and her team is already stretched thin. And Natalie wants to guide them. She wants to be the type of leader they deserve, but she feels drained, like she's pouring from an empty cup. For years, Natalie has thrived as the VP of Business Development for a research organization that supports national defense. And she's had so much success because she is willing to put in the hard work, the long hours, and she has relentless drive. But the cost lately has been undeniable. Most nights, her husband is eating dinner alone. She's had personal education goals that she's put off for years. And every time she tries to rest, her mind just spirals, thinking about the demand and the deadlines. Natalie tells herself, if I just push through this quarter, then everything will ease up. But that's just not true. Because every quarter there are new expectations. And rather than feeling fulfilled, she feels like she's stuck in a cycle. Productive, but never at peace. Successful, but never satisfied. And what Natalie needs is not another productivity hack. What she needs is to find balance, to create space, to be able to reconnect with her husband, to commit to her own personal education, and to just be. But she doesn't know how to step off the treadmill without feeling like everything is falling apart. Today, I'm speaking with Lisa Pachence, Master Certified Coach and Executive Mentor who helps leaders like Natalie break free from burnout and redefine success on their terms. Lisa helps leaders to be able to protect their time, lead with purpose, and build lives that are not just successful, but deeply fulfilling. And I'm excited to hear how Lisa would help someone like Natalie, someone who is caught in a storm of professional demands, to find the freedom that she's longing for. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Lisa, one thing I read about you is that you said you're a recovering overachiever, and that in the past, it's felt similar to falling up the stairs. I read that and I said, I got to ask her what she means by that. So what is that? What do you mean by that?
Well, oftentimes I think overachievers are those who set out to do well, of course. I mean, don't we all just want to do well and succeed on the planet? But there's a particular type of survival mechanism that has overachievers or perfectionists um, implement a type of work ethic that actually isn't their own. It's what they think that society wanted from them. It
Hmm.
was maybe a value that was instilled by their family or by their interpretation of what is culturally successful, or it's how they've gotten their value their entire lives, but it's not actually based on what they want. And that inherently is the biggest problem in perfectionism, in overachievement, in high achieving. It's a winning strategy that isn't actually based on your values and your internal compass. It's an externally motivated mechanism that isn't actually built for you to get things right. It's just built to avoid failure. And
Hmm.
overachievers tend to see failure as mediocrity or just meeting the bar or just meeting expectations. So there's this experience of, well, I'm achieving, I'm doing well, but something still isn't aligned. So you're kind of tripping and falling up the stairs accidentally because it's not really, maybe you think it's your own goal setting or your own direction, but it's actually not. And that's the disconnect internally that tends to happen with what I call underfulfilled overachievers. You are unfulfilled or underfulfilled because your overachieving isn't based on what you actually want, whether you know it or not.
Hmm. So if you consider yourself someone who's a recovering overachiever, there must have been an experience that you had where you were falling up those stairs. So can you tell me that story of what it was like for you years ago before you came to the realization that this isn't fulfilling you?
hmm Well, I love talking about this story because it's what led me to coaching. So I was in recruiting and HR my whole life, my whole adult life. And before I became a coach, I was hired to be recruitment director for a financial services company, a Fortune 100 company in Manhattan. I was running a department of recruiters who were a lot of them twice my age, and I was not doing a good job. I was making a lot of people uncomfortable, unhappy. I wasn't inspiring in the way that I wanted to inspire, and yet I was still successful. I was achieving, but I was underfulfilled because I was not creating the experience that I wanted inside of this job.
Hmm.
So, at my work in my networking in Manhattan, I ran across a coach. In one conversation, I was able to make more progress than in what a decade of therapy could do for me.
Hmm.
And I discovered what I just mentioned before, that a lot of my goals were based on what I think I should be doing, how I think I should be doing it, but it wasn't actually the type of work that was fulfilling. And it certainly wasn't from the place that was fulfilling me.
Hmm.
So I had to reset my internal value system, what lit me up. I had to get very real on how I define success. And for me, success is a well-balanced life. Now, I think balance is a bit of a myth. You can't always have balance. That's a very precarious uh, set of physics that has to happen. You have to have very carefully placed weights on both sides. And life doesn't operate like that. It's more like burners on a stove, and you really don't want all firing at the same time. And the oven really needs to rest at some point. So, um, redefining success was a game changer for me. Taking on radical responsibility and radical authenticity was also a
Hmm.
game changer. And having a lot more grace and compassion for myself in the learning process was a
Yeah,
game changer.
I like the visual of the burners on a stove. I like that a lot. I've never heard it that way, and I agree with you. I don't think there's such a thing as work life balance. I often have heard the term, and I really like this term, work life harmony. Um, what I did recently was I had a talk where I put fingers up like with people's faces, and it was like trying to argue that work and life are at odds, but really they're just all fingers on your hand, right? It's just that it's your whole life, right?
Mhm.
It's
Love
similar
that.
in what you were saying. So well, you said something that piqued my interest about how one coaching session would have provided you more value than years of therapy. And it got me thinking about how oftentimes there's a misunderstanding about the differences between those two. And people are like, well, should I go get therapy and counseling, or should I go seek out a coach? And given that you have such experience with coaching, I thought that I'd like to just personally hear your insights on this. And what do you think are the differences? Like, in other words, when should someone be pursuing therapy, when should someone be pursuing coaching?
Mhm. Well, it's an intricate topic. And I love starting out with let's call it a parable. Say there's someone stuck in a hole, and a therapist walks up to this person in a hole. The therapist might ask, well, how did you get there? And what were your family dynamics that got you there? What's your relationship with your dad? Tell me about your feelings inside of that hole. And the therapist would talk about the past, the how and the why that person is in the hole. A consultant comes along and gives the person in the hole five different ways to climb out of the hole. Here are the five different ways, the five different frameworks you can climb out of the hole. Choose one and I'll help you. A mentor walks over to the person in the hole and says, here's how I climbed out of the hole. I can help you do that based on my past experience. Here are some things to look out for. A coach comes along to that person in the hole and says, hey, you're in a hole. What would you like to do about that?
And
It's
okay, so
kind of
then
a
I love it. I love it.
snarky experience. But the intention is that coaching is about allowing your client, your thinking partner, to operate better in their self thought leadership
Hmm.
and take radical responsibility for how they want their life to go based on self awareness, choice, action, and accountability.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the I loved the analogy. I was just taking it in.
Mm,
I've heard one similar where it's like a bicycle where if you want to learn how to ride a bike, it's like a trainer would pull up a PowerPoint and just explain, here's how the bike works, and a mentor would ride the bike and say, here's how I ride the bike, and a
mm,
coach would invite you to get on the bike and then start running alongside with you as you're
mm.
riding it. Um,
Yes.
yeah, but I
Oh, I
like
love that.
the layer that you gave of the whole because it also incorporates therapy and the clear distinction through the analogy. I think that's spot on. And okay, so you then had this conversation. It really kind of woke you up. You're still a high achiever, though, Lisa. You're still someone,
Mm.
right, who cares about performing. What are the differences that you see in yourself now that you didn't see in yourself back when you were falling up the stairs?
Mm. Where to start? I think we need about five more podcast episodes. So here's another thing about therapy and coaching. They're sisters. Coaching was created from therapy, from cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectal behavioral therapy. It is an offshoot of the therapeutic branch of psychology. What had me stuck in the therapeutic realm was the fact that there wasn't sufficient awareness in the moment to have me change what was happening in my brain pattern and my brain chemistry and take on something radically different. So what happens nowadays, and yes, I'm still an overachiever. I'm a recovering overachiever. I think it's always going to be a default of mine. And I think that as human beings, we have to have a survival mechanism. In fact, it's scientifically proven we all have survival mechanisms. Otherwise, we'd need a lobotomy and have to take out our amygdala. It's there for a reason, so
Yeah.
that if we're walking down the street late at night in Manhattan in the bad parts of the city and we see a tiger running our way, we don't go up to the tiger and go, hi, I'd like to be your friend. We run in the opposite direction. We need to
Yeah.
have the survival mechanisms in order to survive. So, for myself, what has happened over the years is that even though I still get into these patterns of achieving and high performance, and sometimes get into the patterns going towards burnout, I'll be able to interrupt them a lot sooner because of the
Mm.
awareness. And I also notice that for myself, I can raise the ceiling so much higher on my goals, on who I want to be, on the experience I want to have on in life, because my floor has been so strengthened. My support systems, my community, the basics, and the mental entrepreneur habits that I take on a regular basis that are so ingrained. I do them like I brush my teeth. My relationships are stronger. My goal setting is healthier. So even if I get into these habits of, committing, and then going, whoops, I committed too much, but I don't want to take anything off my plate. I guess, I'll just white knuckle it until the end of the season. It still doesn't have the same impact. And my experience of my life isn't the way that it used to be. It is empowered, it is chosen. And I can also choose my survival mechanism on purpose, just like I can choose to do something different on purpose. So that awareness piece is crucial. It's what sets coaching apart from a lot of other industries. And so for coaches out there who are trained, one of the core competencies of coaching is evoking awareness in your client. And it isn't the coach doing the work for your client. It is supporting the client to evoke their own awareness
Yeah.
based on observing themselves, their circumstances, and what's important about their lives, and having that become a habit that becomes ingrained so that they can interrupt patterns when they see it coming up.
Yeah. One of the things I'll share with a person of whom is interested in getting coaching from me, I'll say something like, my job is just hold up the mirror for you and just show you at different angles some of the things that you may not be noticing, because only then can you start to fix something, because you can start to see it for yourself.
Yes. Have you heard of the Buddhist teaching and training that support an individual to look at something from seven different views?
I
Have you heard of
haven't,
that?
but I,
The,
I'm gonna look it up because that sounds amazing. But tell me more about it.
yes. So it's similar to the seven-eyed model in coaching supervision. And I first became aware of this from the book by the Dalai Lama. And oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the book, but it was written in 2018 by a videographer, a documentary of all things. And the Dalai Lama was speaking about how when Buddhist monks train, they're supported to look at anything from seven different viewpoints, almost like, you see an accident on the road.
Hmm.
Every person is seeing it from different angles. And so it supports you to look at perspective as an interpretation of life. And we can always reinterpret based on what's effective, based on what's supportive, and based on what moves you forward instead of has you stuck.
Yeah. The Our first thought about something is just one angle of those seven different views, or well beyond even seven, of the ways in which we can see it. And what I find is that so often that first viewpoint or first angle is just way off, or it doesn't serve me, or you know what I mean. It's just one way of seeing a circumstance, a situation, what someone said. And what I think, Lisa, is that we can cultivate that skill of
Mm.
being able to see things from different angles and consider other perspectives. So, from the work that you do, what are some of the levers that one can pull? What are the things that one can do to be able to cultivate more of that awareness?
Mm. Well, I think asking yourself or having a coach ask you provocative questions like, is this true? How true is it? If this wasn't true, what else might be available? Who do I become if this is true? I always like playing the game fact or fiction. Is my view on this true fact? Can I get a bowl of it? Can I argue it in court so much so that both sides would see it as a fact? Or is it fiction? And frankly, most of the time, it's fiction. So 1% of life is what happens, and 99% is how we interpret it.
Mm,
And most of our lives is built on the subconscious. We have more than 60,000 thoughts a day. And if only 1% is conscious, and if only 1% is true and intentional, imagine what we're not present to. So
yeah.
I think the power of coaching lies in being able to ask ourselves these questions. Is this helpful? What am I committed to here? What's the game that I'm playing in this moment? Am I playing a game to win or am I playing a game not to lose?
Yeah. I was thinking about the Judge Your Neighbor. Have you ever heard of that? Judge Your Neighbor
Mm-mm.
with, I think it's Byron Katie. I wrote Byron Katie, but I have to double check that because I'm pretty certain it was Byron Katie. Where one of the questions that she asks is a question that you brought up, which is, who would you become if this wasn't true? Or who would you be if this weren't true. So she goes through four questions. First one is this true? The second question is, are you 100% sure that this is true? The third question is, how do you react when you think that thought? Which is one of my favorites because it gets you to realize that the thought of, because it's more about how you deal with interpersonal conflict, the thought about that person is only hurting you. It's not really hurting them, right? And then who would you become if that you no longer had that thought, or who would you become if that weren't true?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. And there's so many, it's amazing what stories we make up in our heads.
Yeah.
We are constantly living in our stories, and those stories are usually based on our past, on our biography, our biology, our family dynamics, our environment. And it's not actually based on current reality. It's just the thing that we attach to and go, out of all the millions of stories we could make up about this, I am hell bent that it is definitely this. It is because they disrespect me, or they don't trust me, or I'm not valued, or whatever it is, or I'm unappreciated. Or it's just amazing how decisive our stories can be,
Yeah.
and they're predictable and they're familiar. And that's one of my favorite parts of coaching is playing kind of like where was Waldo, spot the comfort zone or the familiar story, like, oh, and how is that familiar, or what was predictable about the situation, or what's the story you're telling yourself that also shows up in other places in life.
Yeah.
What's
It's like a storm of stories, right? It's like a storm of stories within our own within our own mind, and the work is to be able to rise above all the stories and to look at them objectively and say, oh, that's what I'm telling. Because otherwise, what happens is we're in the story. This is what I find, Lisa. Right? People are just they're so into the story that on their own, it's really difficult for them to be able to have the kind of awareness to be able to look at it and say, oh, wait, that's the story I'm telling myself. So, of all the steps that one can take, the first step is to be able to rise above it and become aware that you're even telling a story.
Yeah, it is. I think there's thousands and thousands of tools out there in the coaching realm, in the therapy realm, in consulting as well, to be able to get that. I like the visual of rising in the hot air balloon, and being able to see from 1,000 foot view what's actually going on. And there's so much power in supporting the person to be able to observe themselves in the situation. It takes a skill set
Yeah.
to be able
Yeah.
to ask the right questions that unlock the door. And there is
Yeah.
an unlocking experience.
And to have patience, right, Lisa. We have to have patience. And by the way, I want to be sure as we're talking about this that anyone listening, you don't have to be a professional coach that's making a living off of coaching to really
Mm,
apply what we're talking about. If you're someone who influences others, then you are coaching them in some ways. If you, as a parent, you could be coaching someone, right? As a leader within an organization, or even you're an individual contributor, but you have influence over others. What we're talking about here could help in any of these arenas. To have that kind of patience where you don't just rush into try to solve someone's problems. No one likes being told what to do. No one likes when someone else points out their problem and says, this is what's wrong with you. Right? That's not
mhm.
effective coaching. It's having the kind of patience to be able to look at someone and say, I know you can figure this out. I just going to guide you through the steps.
I run a coach training program for coaches that are interested in getting their master certified coaching credential, because I firmly believe that the ability to do what you're saying, to have patience, to provide space, to use silent and spaciousness effectively, to support the other person to become the version of themselves they want to be, is such a needed skill set. And you can form mastery no matter where you are in life. However, coaching mastery starts with self mastery. And I'm a firm believer that if we are taking a coach approach to anything, to parenting, to supporting friends, to just being a person out in the world with influence and inspiration, we have to be doing our own work in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Oh, it's you're spot on. I mean, the I notice it that when I'm in a good place and I have better energy, I show up better for the clients that I work with one on one. And on days where I'm not doing so well, it could affect the session. So we do need to be at our very best. And in earlier when you were bringing up stories, I thought about how
Mm.
we told that story, Natalie, earlier with what she's going through, and what is from what you heard of the story. If you were to imagine what Natalie's going through every day, what's the story she's telling herself, Lisa? What do you think is if you when you read that, what can you pull from that and saying here's what I think the story is? Obviously, you'd ask her, but what do you think is the story that she's telling herself?
Well, I want to make it abundantly clear that I could guess her story, but I don't actually know what's going on. And I think it would actually um, detract from Natalie's experience if I were to guess. However, I do have some guesses
Yeah.
based on my experience in working with women like Natalie all the time. And given that I was Natalie, I was at that point where I was so burnt out from burning the candle at both ends, from working myself into the ground, trying to be someone who I actually didn't want to be. I just thought I should and needed to be. So my questions would be around, where do you get your value, Natalie?
Mm,
What is the game that you are winning at, even if you don't want to be playing that game? Because we're always playing a game at any point in time, even if it's a game that causes us to be burnt out, to pressure ourselves, to perform until we drop. So I do wonder if the stories that are in her on the playing field for her are things like, I get my value from hard work,
mm,
or people won't love me if I stop working so hard, or everyone relies on me to be the one all the time. I can't possibly stop, or I'd be in danger of losing everything if I were to do something different.
yeah.
So my guess is that it's around self-worth and self-value. And it's a very common thing for high performing women in our modern culture that we are so wrapped around the axle of our self-worth and what we believe ties into our value and how we're loved.
And this is related to, or please elaborate if you could. Is this related
Mhm.
to what you were saying earlier about society and the kind of pressure or the kind of not pressure, but what we take from the outside world that makes us then believe this is how we're supposed to be?
Very much so. So, in a society where the definition of success lies on title and money and being infallible, which means you're not allowed to be vulnerable or show weakness, whatever that means, then by default, your value is tied to making money, to your title, and to performing without failure.
Mm,
For women, there is the standard is the same, and yet we also have a pressure to be. I'm a mom of a 3-year-old, so I certainly started feeling this pressure when I had my son. That there's also a standard, subconscious or conscious, of also being caretakers, of running the household, and now that might be an outdated positioning, but it's still very alive in our culture. And our culture is still dominated by the masculine, where that idea of don't show weakness is still very prevalent. So our value tends to be in those things based on what's already been set up. What are your
Eh,
thoughts?
Well, I wanted to also have you and I actually together explore how there's also the way in which others respond to a high performing, high achieving woman in the workforce. Because
Mhm.
I do think there's a factor there. Here's what I mean. It's like, yes, the pressure that one puts on themselves, but I've also worked with a lot of women who are in these high levels, and I can sense from what I learn is that the way in which people react to them is completely different than how men are being reacted to in similar positions. So there's a interpersonal dynamic there that I wanted to ask you to just talk to me a little bit about, because yes, there's the work that Natalie would have to do on herself, but there is a real world factor here of how others
Mhm.
are reacting to her.
Yes, very much so. There's a quote that I like to use that we train other people how to treat us. And people already come pre-trained, whether we train them or not. But oftentimes, we will train other people in who we are, what we offer, how we're going to be in any situation. So, let's say a people pleaser is in a family dynamic of four, and the three other people relate to that human being as someone who will naturally kind of go along to get along.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, that person, let's say, hires a coach and decides to advocate for their desires, their boundaries, something different than what's already there. Well, it messes up the family dynamic. And for good reason. You can't have a breakthrough without experiencing some form of breakdown. And sometimes it's internal and sometimes it's external. So people come pre-trained with that. And I think society does as well. There there's a really interesting framework that I learned in a DEI training way back when, and it's more cultural training. So in a company culture, there are four levels of responsibility. So there's personal responsibility to affect change. There's team responsibility to affect change. There's leadership responsibility to affect change. And there's organizational responsibility to affect change.
Hmm.
So, in order for change to actually happen on an organizational level, all four components need to be somewhat running coherently. And
Yeah.
personal responsibility only goes so far inside of systemic problems.
And here's the thing, right? With the systemic problems, so much of that could be outside of Natalie's control, but she could just do what she can to effectively communicate in ways that uh, will, I guess, advocate for herself without it becoming there being a negative consequence. Like here's what I mean. I once read this research, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, where it said a male's tonality is much less received less sensitively than a woman's tonality, which I thought was interesting, which is to suggest that if a woman is a high performer and she maybe is speaking with a bit of a firmer tonality, it's
Mm.
received with more sensitivity than if a male is doing it. And
Sure.
that's part of just the way. I don't want to say it's just the way it is, because I don't think that's true, but it's pre-trained, as you were saying a moment ago, right? So I'm just imagining for our female listeners as well as our male listeners who work with females at high level, how do we work with that? How do we fix that?
Well, I wish I had a magic answer. And actually, what came to mind as you were speaking is the evolutionary component to all of this. As much as I feel like some people might bristle at the concept, there is a certain reliance on women to care for, to be caretakers, to be caring. Every single person on the planet has been born, right? And you are born from a female identified human being. You are incubated in a female identified human being. You are cared for in that capacity. So there's a biological evolutionary component here that I think we take for granted that has all of the, the other cultural components and economic components mapped onto it.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. And how do we go about changing it? Well, I think that it starts with the person because
Yeah.
there's only so much we can control in the world. We can't control other people and what they do, but we can control our attitude and our actions. And those are the only two things that we can really provide in order to inspire change. I think it starts with one person, and that one person can become a system
Yeah.
if others are on board.
Yeah, and I think what you just said there, Lisa, is very powerful because it's acknowledging the reality. We have to start with what is, and it isn't to say that we have to deny that reality or ignore it. It's we can or resign to it either, which is, hey, this is the reality, and there is some personal ownership one has to take to be able to then work through the reality. Both men and women in the workforce need to be more aware of these kind of things where we have these kind of biases, there's these kind of tendencies. Now, in Natalie's case, which is I appreciate you said first she needs to start with her, right? And asking some of those questions around where
Mm.
she gets her value. And then you asked a question that was interesting. You said, what's the game you're winning at? And I wanted to ask you more about why that question.
Yeah. Okay. So imagine if I were to follow you, Jay, around with a video camera for a week on mute. I had no idea what you were saying. I had no idea what other people were saying, but I was just watching your actions and what you were doing. And if I were to guess at what you were playing, like the game that you were playing, the game of life, that would be the thing that I'm talking about. So, in the case of someone like Natalie, my guess is that the game she was playing is preventing personal failure.
Powerful.
Or or it might be a game of work harder in order to survive.
Yeah, or it could even be something like, don't let anybody down, right? If she's putting it all on her shoulder. Because in the story, she's like, she keeps meeting those expectations and then more expectations get put on her. And she has to then meet those expectations. Because maybe, and to your point, we'd have to ask her to find out more, but it could be that she's just so afraid of not delivering for everyone else.
Yeah. What's your relationship to disappointment, Natalie?
Yeah.
What happens when you do disappoint? What happens when you do let things down or let someone down? What would happen if you dropped a ball?
Yeah. So I love the video camera, by the way. That's a great way to put it. If a video, like, because that's as evidence based as it could get, and helping someone to be able to look at it from that perspective. If that mirror, like I was saying earlier, that mirror was following you around and you were then watching it, same thing, or at the camera. That's really cool. Okay, so when you think about what you download, let's say you download some of this information from Natalie, obviously the exact strategies or things could vary depending on how she answers you. But when we think about some of the practical things that you find work for people who are the high achievers, yet they're not very fulfilled, are there things that you find tend to work in many of the cases? When I mean activities, it's specific techniques, approaches, routine things, habitual things that help someone to be able to get to that space of fulfillment rather than burnout.
Yes. So the first thing that I would do is I would map out what she's dreamed she's always wanted but feels like is impossible.
Mm,
Those are the impossible goals that we start with. What do you feel like you've always wanted but isn't possible? And oftentimes it's some sort of experience of peace, satisfaction, balance, fulfillment, legacy, impact. It's something very soul, heart based and it's an experience. It's not actually a goal. And that's the issue that I have with a lot of uh, smart goal creation, and honestly a lot of where coaches start is, let's start with a smart goal, or let's start with the wheel of life, and then specifically, oh, 20, I want to increase my sales by 20% or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, but what's the experience on the other side that you want, that you feel like is impossible now? And you always want to start in the future. And sometimes for people who are what I call smart rats, like they can kind of outsmart any sort of coaching conversation with analysis, with facts, with scientific understanding. They use their intellect as a shield instead of talking about the real conversation. What matters to you that you're not allowed to talk about? So it's those things. It's You have to get in there. You have to find what key unlocks the door in order for the transformation to really begin. And that's where I kind of poke and try to understand, how does this person operate? What are they not talking about? How do people typically be with them that I can be differently?
Mm.
So by looking at that impossible dream first, we then start a completely different conversation. So Natalie might want to say, I just want to, beat by my own drum. I want to be able to walk my own path. I want to be able to have a job that I am fulfilled at, make messes, let some people down, and still have a great life. So if you reverse engineer a project from that, Natalie might have to operate quite differently, but the changes are micro. So oftentimes in my coaching, we start with noticing practices. Notice where you feel like you can't let anybody down, or if you feel like it's all on you.
Mm.
What's What are all the ways that you, Natalie, keep that story alive, that it's all in you? How are you training other people that you will always be the one to carry the team, that nobody else can be relied on but you? And the thing about something like people pleasing or not wanting to let people down is that unfortunately, it's kind of manipulative. Like, you are manipulating other people into valuing you based on a set of rules that aren't actually your own, that you
Yeah.
will please them instead of what's actually real for you.
Lisa, I very often have said this, and sometimes you don't like it when I say it, but when people are in that space of people pleasing, not wanting to, I say you're being selfish. That doesn't always land well. Depends on who I'm talking to. But aren't they? I mean, isn't it really more about you wanting to get a validation for yourself? Isn't it more? That's really what it's for. In other words, there's sometimes I'll use it as a way to really kind of wake someone up in a harsh way. Depends on the person, but it is true in my opinion. And I'm a overcoming people pleaser. I've my whole life I would want to
Mm,
always please everybody. But now I realize that if I fall into that pattern, I'm actually being quite self-absorbed. It On the surface it could look like, oh, I'm trying to help everybody else and make everybody else happy. But the truth is, no, I want everyone to like me. I want everyone to approve of me.
exactly. It is nefarious, isn't it? It's a sneaky little thing.
Yeah.
And people don't actually get the real you. They just get a front. They get the facade, in those like old Western movies where the facade on the front of like the criminal house falls down, and oh, look, it's a
Yeah.
house of criminals in the Wild West. So yeah, I think it's about likability
Yeah.
and not wanting people to leave you. It's about this false sense of safety, but it's a quick hit, and then it's on to the next thing, the next project. And so in Natalie's case, what I'd look at is building her capacity to be with things like disappointment, or other people's opinions and judgments of hers? How do you build that sort of resiliency? How do you build your self resiliency in the face of all of that?
Yeah. To
And a
not be
lot of this
so,
is micro changes.
yeah, and to not be so dependent on what others say or it's actually, if you really break it down, it's not even what other people think, it's what you think other people think.
Yes. And that's a house of mirrors, to go back to the mirror metaphor. You don't actually know what's going on over there. And
Right.
even if you ask and get an answer, you still might not know what's going on over there.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So with that, it's actually really freeing in that since I'm never going to know anyway, why am I concerned with it? you know? It-
Yeah. Is it
yeah.
helpful? Is it efficient? Is it effective? Does it
Right.
support you? Does it actually support anyone else?
Yeah. I
Often
just
not.
had it's interesting we're bringing that up. I had a session this morning where this kind of
Mm.
thing came up where um it was the person was very concerned that they could lose like the trust and respect of others within the organization. And the way I posed it was, how could you ever really know if they even do trust and respect you anyway? So it's a funny thing we do. It's kind of like it was similar to what we were saying before. It's a story we're telling ourselves, and I think at some point it's either yes, change the story, or it's just drop the story altogether. Depends on what the story is. Now, I always want to invite everyone here on this show to be able to imagine that they meet this person in the story. So let's say Natalie is reaches out to you and wants to get some coaching and tells you her story, Lisa, of what she's going through. You listen, you acknowledge what it is that you hear. And there are a few questions you already posed, so maybe some of those will be brought up here. But what would you want to be asking her to be able to get her from where she is now, where she's feeling stuck, she's overworking herself, burning out, to that place of fulfillment? What would you ask her?
I was gonna, I had a series of questions that I was docking in my head, and the thing that just came to me, Natalie, if you were to fast forward in your life and meet your 80-year-old self who looks back on this chapter, you sitting at night, burning the candle at both ends, and she were to give you one piece of advice, what would that advice be to you right now?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a great question, and it's a way to really get her to zoom out and think about what's most important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What's it costing you? What's the payoff? And what's the cost of not doing anything different 20 years from now?
yeah. It's a question that all of us could be asking when we're in those moments of feeling stuck, feeling gripped by something that in the end may not even be that important,
Mm.
may just be something that we're spinning our wheels about. So I love it, and Lisa, I'm so glad that we made the time to have this conversation. Thank you so much, and for everyone listening, to learn more about Lisa's coaching, her website is coachingwithlp.com, coachingwithlp.com, and I know you're quite active on LinkedIn as well, so anyone could just search Lisa Pachence. Pachence, am I saying it right?
Mhm. Yes, you
Pachence.
got it.
And right there on LinkedIn, I know you have a lot of content there. So Lisa, thank you again for this conversation. It was excellent. I appreciate your time.
It's been so lovely, Jay. What a great conversation. I love how you construct your podcast. I had such a good time. Thank you again.
It was so great to connect with Lisa. She had a lot of personal experience coaching leaders who are high achievers that she brought into that conversation, which I thought was so valuable. And I'm going to synthesize it down to our insights and our actionable takeaways, as I always do. So the first of three insights: the idea of falling up the stairs, how society imposes on us what we determine is our self-worth and our values. And when we do that, we can oftentimes be underfulfilled overachievers. So calibrate your own values and let that be what determines your self-worth, not what society dictates. Money, status, these kind of things. And I thought that the example of falling up the stairs was a good visual for us to take away. Second insight, what is the game you're playing? If I were to follow you around with a camera and the audio turned off, what would be your behaviors? What would you be focusing your attention on? How would you be acting? And that will tell us the game you're playing. Is it that you're afraid of letting people down? Is it that you're scared of disappointment? Is it that you're telling yourself you need to work super hard for people to approve of you? Using that kind of way of seeing yourself, that third-party perspective, can be super valuable in understanding the game that you're playing. Third insight, the evolutionary consideration. I thought that was a really powerful part of our conversation, where she mentioned how women are caregivers, and that is something that's in our DNA in many ways, and not only from the female perspective, but also from the male perspective, which is we assume women are the caregivers and the caretakers. So the only thing that you have power over there is your own attitude and your own actions in relation to that. But I do think it's a valuable thing to take inventory of, and then to adjust your attitude and actions accordingly, knowing that that is a common pattern we all fall down. Actionable takeaways. The first one is ask provocative questions. She brought up how you could ask yourself, is this fact or is this fiction? Very often it's fiction. Very often what we're telling ourselves about something is not fact, it's a story. So knowing that is so valuable. You can coach yourself in many ways. Obviously, you can have a coach help you to do it, but it is helpful for you to learn that tool yourself. Second actionable takeaway, train people how to treat you. Now, people will always come to you pre-trained, but that doesn't mean you should resign to that training. You have some power in being able to train others on how to treat you, so be sure you're being proactive and intentional with that. Third actionable takeaway, map out what you've always wanted but feels impossible. What is it that you've always wanted but you told yourself it's not possible to have? Really know what that is, those impossible goals. So often, the reason you have the experience in life that you have is because of the limits you've placed on yourself. And I mean that from the perspective not just of achieving more and having success. I mean that in regards to ensuring all of the different buckets of your life are filled. Relationships, health, personal. If you tell yourself that there's trade-offs, then you're going to live that. You're going to have that. So set those kind of goals that you would tell yourself are impossible, because I assure you, they are possible to achieve. Join us on Friday's episode. I'm going to have a little fun. We got Halloween coming up. So I thought I'd share 7 lessons, 7 life lessons from scary movies. What can we take from Friday the 13th, from Halloween with Mike Myers or Beetlejuice? What are some lessons that we could pull from those movies and from those characters even? So I thought we'd do something a little different because Halloween's coming up. And I'm going to walk you through, I guess, these 7 lessons that we can learn from these thrillers, from these scary movies, from these Halloween movies. You may be watching some of these movies already. It's that time of year where we do, right? So I thought, why not pull some lessons out of those? So in the spirit of Halloween, don't miss Friday's episode. Until next time, thank you so much for listening.